Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Unchained Labs Introducing LEA 9 webinar. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. Should you wish to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of your screen, and we will do our best to address your questions during the Q&A segment. If you need to reach an operator at any time, please press *0. I would like to now turn the conference over to Joe Barco, Senior Director of Marketing for Unchained Labs. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as I talk to you about LEA 9, which is an easier way to design workflows with your automation system. The outline of my talk today, I will cover a few topics. I will do a brief introduction to LEA 9 for those of you who do not currently have a pre-slate system. I will talk about the new feature that is added in LEA 9, which is called Design Creator, and I will walk through an example of how to use that within the workflow design. And I will give some information to customers who already have LEA on their systems and talk about how to upgrade your existing installation of LEA. For those of you who are not currently using a free slate instrument or do not currently have LEA, I wanted to briefly discuss what LEA is for. So LEA stands for Laboratory Execution and Analysis Software. And the intent behind LEA is pretty simple. It is that there is a lot of experimental design issues that go into creating an experiment and doing that in high throughput manner. When you do stuff in high throughput, you simply have a lot more data to analyze, and you need some way to kind of pull it all together. So LEA was really designed to allow for a well-by-well analysis of information and tracking of that. So what you can do is you can design an experiment at your desk about how and what you want to run in the automation system. LEA also runs the automation system to execute the experiment you're running. And most importantly, I think it clarifies and collates all of the analysis information together. So not only do you essentially have one set of programs, one set of controls that allows you to go from experimental design to analysis. What I think makes LEA exceptionally useful in this is that it also allows you to pull information from other devices into your experiment. If you have a 96-volt plate with 96 different conditions on it, you may want to do a set of analysis or a set of automation work with it with your automation system, but you may want to take those samples and do other measurements downstream of that. And so by creating and having data loaders from those other devices, you can tie that information into your initial library design, which tracks both how the experiment was executed and all of the data that comes off of that. So with that information, what you can now do is pull in information from your experiment and every part of the analysis that you do to your sample after that, and have it all possible to visualize and collate the data and look at it all together. So that makes it unique among essentially lab automation software to be able to pull all of this information together down the road. So there's really three major parts for LEA. First is Library Studio, which is the experimental design part of how to lay out a plate or a set of samples. There's Automation Studio, which controls how you actually execute the experiment. And then there's multiple methods of doing the analysis. So there's a program called PolyView and another program called LEA Analysis. These allow you to visualize and pull the data together to look at it all at once. LEA itself has gone through a number of iterations in its history. What we're introducing today is LEA 9. LEA 9 is the key functionality or difference in LEA 9 is the addition of a program called Design Creator. So Design Creator is not a new program. It is an application, an add-in, or a plug-in, you choose the term, to Library Studio. So the intent behind this is really to simplify the creation of workflows. There is a lot of complexity in terms of all the things you can do with an automation system. That complexity is increased the more types of devices and things that you can automate. This allows this process to be a little bit more streamlined, and it allows you to focus on operations that are specific to the automation system that you're connected to. This goes through a process, sort of like a wizard, so a step-by-step process of designing your workflow, and allows and adds a level of verification and validation to the design you've created that was not present in LEA in previous versions. Those of you who currently have LEA will see a window that looks very familiar, which is a process in Library Studio that talks about, essentially in this particular example, is buffer exchange. But really the key features of information in Library Studio is it tells me what I'm doing. So what I'm doing to this plate is I'm adding a reagent, I'm adding antibody, I'm doing a buffer exchange process. So there's different parts of this protocol. There's the maps, which is the what am I doing, and then LEA has a level of tags, and the tags are how are you doing this. The tag information, as we've added devices over the years and added features that have been requested by customers overall, the number of tags has increased dramatically. The challenge with the tags is that you see all of the tags, so even tags that are not specific to the automation system that you're using. You also have to remember the tags or sort of know what the tags are before you start to use them. So this requires a level of complexity in terms of a number of things. It means that oftentimes people who are just learning on the system have a lot of challenges in coming up to speed quickly. The other element of this is that another user in your lab cannot easily and quickly identify what's happening in your experiment because they may not be familiar with the tags. The third element of that is that the tags could be typed in error, and if you made a mistake in typing the tag, you would not notice this until you got to the actual part where you're ready to run the experiment. So we found that it was creating an extra set of challenges to our end users and running with the tags, so we wanted to create an alternate way to do this. If I take this exact same design and run it through LEA 9, I don't have to add this tag information in. So what I can do is focus on the what. What am I trying to accomplish with this experiment, with this particular workflow, have that information, and then have the tags created. Now, I still need to tell the instrument how I'm accomplishing these tasks, but rather than adding information in on the tag side, I'm going to use the Design Creator button and add it in step by step. So the intent behind this is really to make creating a protocol more intuitive. It makes it easier for you to run and support it and have other people in your lab run it as well. So this is, again, the same protocol. I'm going to walk through this example or a similar example using Design Creator. The example I'm going to use today is a buffer exchange workflow. So in our buffer exchange junior, we have the concept of buffer exchange should be pretty evident. We have a reagent. We want to remove the buffer. We want to add a different buffer in. So the way we're going to accomplish this is we're going to add our reagent to each well of the plate, of the unfiltered plate. We're going to put it in the volume check. We are going to check the volume. We are going to then go into the buffer exchange module, which is then going to pressurize the plate and remove the filtrate. We're going back to the volume check, and then we're going to go back to the liquid handling station and backfill the volume. So essentially the volume that came out in the buffer exchange pressurization, we will identify that information, identify the volume that needs to be added into the next cycle. And in theory, what we want to do is get to a point when we're at about 98% exchange. That, of course, can be set by the end user, and I'll show you that there's different parameters that you can set as you're running through that. So at this point, what I'm going to do is switch to the actual software itself and run through this process. Okay, so those of you who are familiar with Library Studio, you'll recognize this. What I'm going to do is walk people through who may not be 100% familiar with what I'm doing here. So I've identified my reagents. I have a plate that I'm going to add antibody to, which is the unfilter. I have buffers in my block. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to do a 96-well block and 4 buffers distributed within that block already. I'm going to add one map here, which is to remove the antibody from unfilter, and one more task here, which is to add in the buffer back from the deep well block into unfilter. So you can see I have my reagents identified, my maps identified, I have no tags here, and I have no tags at the top part of the window. Now I'm going to hit Design Creator. You will see this first screen, which is now, let me point out a few of the features of the screen. I have a 5-step process that identifies the system, the workflow, configure the hardware, configure the deck, and then validate the design. So the first step I have to do is identify the system that I'm currently running. I am running in standalone mode, and I'm doing a demo instrument, which I have called Unchained Labs System. If you are running off a server, or if you have multiple instruments available to you within your laboratory, you will see the list of instruments that are available to you for Automation Studio. So in my particular case, I just have one system, so I'm running that. I click and select that. Now I have essentially a set of unit operations that are broken up based on how that system is defined. So I have dispense tools, processing, and analytics. So essentially what this is my system and the operations available to me specifically based on what is on my system. So I don't have a whole library of dispense tools. I only have the ones that are physically on my system. I don't have all of the analytic instruments. I only have the ones on my system. So from a standpoint of creating new designs, you don't have to go through as much essentially wasted information to identify what you can actually do. So this is more or less just an informatory step, so I can see everything that's on my system to make sure I can go through the next part of it. So at this point, I can hit Next. It brings me to the workflow steps. So here I have, based on the devices that I saw in the previous tab, I have the process steps that are available to me based on those devices. So I can go through that list and pick those. So these are more or less the equivalent of some of the tags that are available to you now. I have the analytic steps that are available to me for this piece. For the workflow, I've pulled in the information that was in the Library Studio design automatically, so it shows all of those tasks directly, and I have the options available to each. So you should see that I have these red lines around outlining the particular workflow tasks. So that is alerting me that I have information I need to enter there, and gives me essentially what information I need to enter on the options part. So you also see that I have pulled in all of the information from the liquid transfer steps about how I want to add volume in based on the Library Studio design. You'll also notice that I don't have the next tab active or the next button active because I cannot move past this task or the step until I have cleared all of the red tasks. So the first thing I do is I clear the red tasks, and the way I'm going to do that here is a few things. First thing is that I need to add antibody to the unfilter, so I need to select my dispense operation. I'm going to do liquid dispense, and it fills in information that I should be using or it defaults to. So I'm going to use the PDT for that. I don't need to change that. I'm going to use a 250 microliter tip. Actually, I'm going to use a 1 mil tip for that operation, and you'll see now that task is no longer red. I also have other sets of maps or tags available to me. What we've added here is a tip tool so that if you hover over the actual tag, it describes what that tag is going to do. So I have 5 more here. I do not need to do this for all of these. So in my current design of how I'm working on this plate, I already have the deep well block filled. So what I can do is I can do this in a group. I'm going to tell it to skip the dispense step. I can do this 3 more times. I'm going to do the shortcut, which is to hit this checkbox next to it, and then just hit apply. And now I've cleared that because all of these are falling under the same characteristic as the operation step above it. And I have one more task, which is to add the reagent back into the plate after I do the buffer exchange. So I'm going to select that information. I'm doing a liquid dispense. I'm going to use the 6 tip for that, and I'm going to use a 200 microliter tip. So I can now run past this. I can hit the next button because all of these tasks are completed. However, with my real protocol, I have to give it a little bit more information. So if I'm coming up and running the machine, I would personally want to remind myself or remind the person running it to add the plate. So what I'm going to do is add in a process step, which is a pause, and then clear the red lines. And I'm just going to enter information of add plates. Okay. So I've cleared the red. I can go on. On this particular protocol, I need to identify what I'm actually doing, which is the actual buffer exchange step. So far, I've only talked about liquid handling steps. So the processes I need to do here is I want to do a quick vortex to my plate. I want to move my plate to the buffer exchange module, and then I want to set up the configuration for the actual buffer exchange. So I am going to add in those steps. I am going to first move the plate. I am going to configure the buffer exchange. I am going to set the vortex rate because I want to shake it before I actually do the buffer exchange. And then I want to start the buffer exchange. So it doesn't matter where I put these tasks relative to these because these are already considered dispensed. But you can see as I move process steps in, I need to clear. So this is unfilter. This is identifying where I want to move the plate to. In this particular case, it's the buffer exchange chamber. I set the vortex rate. I configure the buffer exchange. And of course, you have all of these options here. So in the previous method, without Design Creator, these would all be separate tags that I have to identify within that process. I'm simply moving it here. You'll also notice that we filled in default values so that you have a starting point with that. So at the moment, I'm not going to address those, but then I just want to start the buffer exchange. So now I've cleared, for all of the individual tasks I've pulled in, I've entered that information. I can click Next, go on to the next step. This is a configure hardware task. This is essentially putting in information that I want to do specifically for certain operations within the workflow. So these are all of the options I have available to me for buffer exchange. And what I can do, without specifically talking about buffer exchange, is just go in and enter the information for this. For the sake of expedience here, I'm just going to accept all of these values and move on and hit Next. My next operation here is to configure the hardware deck. So essentially tell the system where all of my plates are. So this overrides in previous versions of LEA where you needed to answer a bunch of prompts as you went to the system to do that. So this information is going to port over into Automation Studio, so you have that information already there. So I have my library sources. I just need to say what type of plate it is, fill in the red essentially, select where I want to hold that plate or keep it or place it on the deck, and identify whether it's covered or not when I start. So I'm just going to clear these out. I do that for my library, and I do that for my sources. So I've not identified, for example, where my antibody is coming from when I put it into Unfilter. I need to add that information here. I do not need to fill in the amount, so that is the volume in here, but I do need to identify what type of plate it is and where that is coming from. Place that here. Identify where it's pulling the sample from, and again the states that it's pulling it from. So once I have those steps cleared, I can keep moving. So the next step, you'll see within these individual steps, if I make a mistake or I want to change something, I can hit the previous button and go back to it. I can also click on these individual chevrons at the top to return to a certain tab. I wanted to point out that within each of these tabs, I've already mentioned that you have an error checking or at least an information checking process. This also is a level of checking within the task. So if I entered incorrect information or something that was not available to it, the information goes back to red. So it's an error checking within the individual step and then tells me how I need to correct it. What I haven't done yet in this process is I've not actually checked that the whole process works. So based on all of the information and all of the steps that I'm using, I haven't verified yet that that's all going to work together. So the very last tab is a validate design. So that looks across the entire workflow and says this is going to work or is this not going to work. For illustrative purposes, I've put in an error or I've left an error in place. What I wanted to show you is that what happens when you see that, you see a warning that your design's not ready, you cannot save it, but it also tells you where it's missing on the validation. So in this particular case, I left a mistake here, which is I talked about pooling buffer exchange samples, but I didn't identify any other information about pooling. So this gives me not only the error, but it gives me the suggested corrections, which is to go to step 2 and make a fix or go to step 3. So it was really important here for us to identify not just is there an error and give an error code, but give information to allow people to kind of back out of their mistake and understand where and how they made the mistake. In this particular case, it's going to give errors on individual tasks as they go. It's also going to give errors if you try to move a plate somewhere you're not supposed to move it, or if you're going to do something that's going to cause a collision, if you've made steps where you're going to put something or get something that's out of reach of the robot. All of that information is saved within your physical instrument setup, and that gets pulled into your LEA Design Creator as well. I'm going to go back to fix this by going to Configure Hardware. The exchange complete criteria is the error here, so I'm going to change that to not talk about pools and to talk about wells. So I can go back to Validate Design and see that if I clear that task, I now have my design fully validated and I'm ready to save it. So I can hit Finalize. It saves it gives me an option to save the design, and I'm going to save it. And once I save it, it goes back to Library Studio. Takes a moment to save. Now you'll see what has happened here, which is that I can add all of that information. When I first was on the screen, I only had 3 items. You'll see that it's actually gone in and filled in the rest of the design, as for those of you who currently use LEA will recognize, which is now I've added in a lot of extra maps. I've added in tags. So that way, when I take this design to Automation Studio and try to run it, I have all of the information that Automation Studio needs to do this. So again, the intent here is to provide an alternate way for people to adapt to the software, to learn the software more quickly without the interference of trying to learn and remember all of the programmatic tags behind it. So that's LEA 9, that's Design Creator. What I'm going to do is just return to my presentation and provide information for people who are going to, who currently want this. Now, those of you who are covered by LEA subscriptions, this is actually covered by your subscription. So you do not need to pay for this. This is already paid for all intents and purposes. LEA 9 can be put on your system. All new systems that go out from Unchained Labs will now have LEA 9. It's Windows 7 and 10 compatible. It will work on most devices. So if you have some older systems or certain operations or maybe customized things on your system that may not be immediately compatible or easily upgradable. We should talk about that directly. But for the most part, free slate systems, juniors, and then free slate CM3s and Protege should all be eligible for upgrade with paid subscription and coverage. Now, question you may be asking is, if you've already worked on and have many designs on your system, how does this impact those? And really, the answer is simple, that they will work the same as before. So if you have designs already created with a tag, those tags will still work. That workflow design will still work with your protocol that is on your system. So LEA 9 is backwards compatible, again, with most devices and systems. I did mention earlier that not every device has LEA 9 compatibility. If you have existing designs that run through LEA 9, they will still run through LEA 9. If that device is not compatible for some reason, we will let you know. And what that essentially means is that you cannot create new designs through Design Creator for those particular cases. But the vast majority of devices are currently in LEA 9 and currently compatible with Design Creator itself. So what I hope I've shown you today is how to the advantages of LEA 9 and Design Creator, which is a more user-friendly UI. We have a standard modular protocol that goes behind this, so new systems will have a simplified or a standardized protocol to improve the ability to train people and to work on your system. Designs created are validated as they go through. You are specific to the hardware on your system, and only the hardware on your system or some systems available. And you can see that making new designs is easier and quicker to pick up with Design Creator. So to request an upgrade, this is not a direct upgrade in the sense of we send you an installer. You should contact us at support@unchainedlabs.com or go through our website, which is unchainedlabs.com, and you can go to the LEA product page. Your local workflow scientist and your strategic account manager will also have information about how you can upgrade. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation part of it, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for attending.
Thank you. And we do have a few questions that have come in. The first question is, how does LEA 9 impact data analysis add-ins?
It does not. So this is only an add-on for the workflow creation step. So plugins that you have for data analysis and information that comes out of data analysis is all tied to the design that exists already. So there's no impact on LEA 9 on changes to the analysis package that was introduced in 8.6 or other changes to that. So PolyView, for example, not impacted by it at all.
Thank you. And our next question that's come in through the chat here: if my system changes, such as adding a new device, will I see those options in Design Creator?
Short answer is yes. So if you have different configurations for your system as they already exist, that means that there's tasks and operations that are already tied into your protocol as part of running that system. So you will be able to see those options available to you when you go and use Design Creator with that.
Thank you. Our next question: how can I handle multiple systems in my lab if I'm working on designs at my desk?
So the way to handle it at your desk, so if most customers will have set up, if they have one instrument, they may have the instrument available on a rack server. So in those particular instances, you will be able to retrieve and identify your system essentially through the server already. If you have multiple systems at your site, you will be able to choose among those. If you have LEA Benchtop, I see another question coming in about that. If you have LEA Benchtop, you're fine already because that's already been captured as part of your setup. So it's compatible with LEA Benchtop. You pick the server through the RAS server that you already have established in your lab. If you're generally using and working with with multiple systems and designing workflows at your bench or your desk, you're ready or set up to handle all of that.
Perfect. Thank you. Can this design creator be configured for customized systems?
Well, I think with that I'd say that all of our systems are customized to some degree. There's very few cases where systems have gone out identically. My short answer is it depends. So we would the way that we're doing the upgrade path is to come through the support line. We look at your system and just double check that it is compatible. So we do that before we install. For all intents and purposes, there's a handful of things that are not compatible with Design Creator at the moment. That does not necessarily mean you cannot upgrade to LEA 9, but it does mean that creating new designs through Design Creator may not be possible with every device, but it's something we evaluate on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. And our next question, let's say you have multiple systems, for example, one for powder handling and another for liquid handling. How would Design Creator work if you had to break down tasks across multiple instruments?
So at the moment, Design Creator works with one library design per system. So in current versions of Library Studio, you can set up a workflow where you end up using multiple systems as part of that. At the moment, Design Creator is not compatible with that. So if you have existing designs already created where you use more than one system, you can still continue to use those designs. You just wouldn't go through the process of Design Creator for that. We are evaluating changes to the software currently to handle that case where you're using two different systems that have different sets of capabilities on it.
Thank you. And circling back, and this might be a bit of a duplicate here, but if you have any additional comments to expand, we're upgrading our CM3 software to LEA 9, but we'll be going to benchtop standalone mode. Will Design Creator still work?
Yes, it does. And I see another question here while I'm reading about compatibility with LEA 8.3. I believe that's a reference to LEA Benchtop as well. So yes, it is compatible with that. The versioning number on Benchtop is a little bit different, but it does work with Benchtop 8.3.
Excellent, thank you. Another question here, are there any changes to the RAS server data data browser?
Nope.
Excellent. Let's see, we have a comment. It sounds like there are a couple of major changes to LEA 9, the Design Creator, and the standardization of modular components to the protocol. Are there other major changes in LEA 9?
No, the major change in LEA 9 right now is that it adds Design Creator. So there's no other major feature enhancements to that other than confirming Windows 10 compatibility across a larger number of devices. But there is no other major change to that. We will look at we will be doing other feature and bug enhancements to LEA 9.0. So that will be coming in future releases.
Thank you. And that's all the questions that we have time for today. So this concludes the conference call for today, and we thank everyone for tuning in. Have a great day, everyone.